At the Mother's Day dinner, my daughter yelled at me, "You're a witch. I'd rather live with my mother-in-law." Within 48 hours, I made her lose her job and her car. But the real lesson came the next day. Subscribe to the channel for more stories like this, and comment the city you're watching from. I spent 3 days preparing for what I thought would be a perfect Mother's Day dinner. At 66, I don't get many opportunities to have my family all together anymore. So when William suggested we celebrate at my house, I jumped at the chance. I cleaned every corner of my small dining room, polished the china that rarely sees daylight, and spent hours cooking Abigail's favorite pot roast. The same recipe I'd been making since she was a little girl. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here I was trying to create the perfect family moment with a daughter who barely called me twice a month. Abigail arrived 20 minutes late, which wasn't unusual. She walked through my front door like she owned the place, her designer handbag slung over her shoulder, not even bothering to remove her sunglasses indoors. William followed behind her, that familiar look of exhaustion on his face that I'd been seeing more and more lately. "Sorry we're late, Mom," William said, giving me a quick hug. "Traffic was terrible." I wanted to point out that traffic is always terrible at 6 o'clock on a Sunday, and that's why I'd suggested 5:30, but I bit my tongue. I'd learned over the years that pointing out Abigail's inconsideration only made things worse. "No problem at all," I said, forcing a smile. "Dinner's still warm. Let me just set everything on the table." Abigail finally removed her sunglasses, revealing eyes that held no warmth whatsoever. She surveyed my modest dining room with barely concealed disdain, her gaze lingering on the slightly faded wallpaper and the mismatched chairs I'd collected over the years. "William, can you help your mother?" she said without looking at me, already pulling out her phone. The dinner started awkwardly, as most of our family gatherings did. I asked about Abigail's job at the marketing firm, and she gave me one-word answers while scrolling through her phone. I asked about their plans for the summer, and William answered while Abigail continued typing away at her screen. "This pot roast is really good, Mom," William said, clearly trying to fill the uncomfortable silence. "Thank you, honey. I used the same recipe I always." "Could you turn the air conditioning up?" Abigail interrupted, not looking up from her phone. "It's stifling in here." I got up to adjust the thermostat, even though I was already shivering in my lightweight cardigan. When I returned to the table, Abigail was explaining to William why they needed to spend next weekend at his mother Judith's house instead of visiting me as we'd planned. "Judith is having her garden party next Sunday," she said, finally putting her phone face down on the table. "It's important for William's career that we're there. All the right people will be attending." The right people. I'd heard that phrase countless times over the past few years. Apparently, I wasn't one of the right people. "That's fine," I said quietly, cutting my pot roast into smaller and smaller pieces. "We can reschedule." "Actually, Gail," Abigail said, using my first name like she always did when she wanted to distance herself from me, "we need to talk about these weekly dinner expectations." My stomach dropped. I set down my fork and looked at my daughter-in-law, this woman who had somehow convinced my son that his own mother was a burden. "What do you mean?" Abigail sighed dramatically, as if explaining something to a slow child. "William and I have very busy social calendars. We can't keep dropping everything to come here every week just because you're lonely." The words hit me like a physical blow. I glanced at William, hoping he would defend me, say something, anything. But he just stared at his plate, chewing slowly. "I understand you both are busy," I said carefully. "But it's only once a week, and frankly," Abigail continued, her voice getting sharper, "these dinners are always so depressing. This house, this atmosphere. It's not exactly the kind of environment we want to spend our free time in." I felt my cheeks burning with shame and anger. This house might not be a mansion like Judith's, but it was clean, it was warm, and it was filled with love. Or at least I thought it was. "Abigail," William said quietly, "that's enough." But it wasn't enough for her. Something in my expression must have triggered her, because she leaned forward, her eyes blazing with a hostility I'd never seen before. "Do you want to know the truth, Gail?" she said, her voice rising. "The truth is that nobody enjoys coming here. Your son feels obligated and I feel trapped. Every week we sit here listening to you complain about your loneliness, watching you try to guilt trip us into spending more time with you. That's not what I I started, but she cut me off. You want to know what William really thinks about these dinners? She turned to look at my son, who had gone pale. Tell her, William. Tell her how you dread these Sunday visits. Tell her how you've been looking for excuses to skip them. The silence that followed was deafening. I stared at my son, my only child, waiting for him to deny it. Waiting for him to tell his wife she was wrong, that he enjoyed our time together, that I wasn't the burden she was making me out to be. But William said nothing. He just sat there, avoiding my eyes, confirming every cruel word that had just come out of his wife's mouth. That's when something inside me broke. Not just broke, shattered completely. I see, I said quietly, my voice surprisingly steady despite the earthquake happening in my chest. Abigail wasn't finished. She stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the hardwood floor. You know what, Gail? I'm done pretending. You want to know what I really think? You're a bitter, manipulative old woman who uses guilt and pity to control people. You're a witch, and I'm sick of pretending otherwise. The word hung in the air like a curse. Witch. My own daughter-in-law had just called me a witch at my Mother's Day dinner. You know what else? She continued, her voice now loud enough that I worried the neighbors might hear. I'd rather live with Judith than spend another minute in this depressing house with you. At least she knows how to live with dignity instead of wallowing in self-pity. That was the moment. That was when 23 years of being the patient, understanding mother-in-law died completely. 23 years of biting my tongue, of accepting insults disguised as constructive criticism, of watching my son choose his wife over his mother time and time again. I looked at William one more time, giving him a final chance to stand up for me. But he just sat there, staring at his hands like a coward. I think you should leave, I said quietly. Abigail grabbed her purse triumphantly, as if she'd won some kind of victory. Gladly. Come on, William. Let's go to your mother's house. The one who actually knows how to make her family feel welcome. They left me sitting at my dining table, surrounded by the ruins of what was supposed to be a celebration. The pot roast was getting cold, the candles were still burning, and my heart was lying in pieces on the floor. But as I sat there in the silence, something unexpected happened. Instead of crying, instead of falling apart the way I had so many times before, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. I felt angry, really truly angry. And for the first time in decades, I was ready to do something about it. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my kitchen until dawn, drinking cup after cup of coffee and staring at the dirty dishes from the dinner that had changed everything. By the time the sun came up, I had made a decision that would have shocked the old Gail, the one who always turned the other cheek. I was done being a victim. The first call I made was to my old friend Margaret, who worked in human resources at Pinnacle Marketing Group. We'd known each other since high school, long before she climbed her way up the corporate ladder. I hadn't spoken to her in months, but Margaret had always been the type of person who remembered favors. Gail, she said, surprised to hear from me so early on a Monday morning. Is everything all right? I need a favor, Margaret, I said, cutting straight to the point. And I think you might be interested in what I have to tell you about one of your employees. There was a pause. Margaret had always been sharp, and I could practically hear her mind working through the phone. Which employee? Abigail Morrison. My daughter-in-law. Another pause, longer this time. What about her? I took a deep breath. What I was about to do went against every maternal instinct I'd ever had, but maternal instincts were a luxury I could no longer afford. She's been falsifying her expense reports, I said. I've seen the receipts she keeps at home. Personal meals, shopping trips, even her gym membership. All charged to the company account. It wasn't entirely a lie. I had seen Abigail's receipts, scattered across William's kitchen counter during one of my visits. I'd noticed the company credit card being used for things that seemed questionable, but I'd never said anything. I chalked it up to generous corporate policies and minded my own business. But desperate times called for creative interpretations of the truth. That's a serious accusation, Gail, Margaret said carefully. I know it is. And I wouldn't make it lightly. I paused, letting the weight of my words sink in. You know me, Margaret. You know I'm not the type to stir up trouble without good reason. That was true, at least. In all our years of friendship, I'd never been one for gossip or drama. If anything, I'd always been too quiet, too willing to keep other people's secrets. What exactly are you asking me to do? I'm asking you to take a closer look at her accounts. I think you'll find what you need to find. Margaret was quiet for a long moment. You know I can't promise anything, Gail. But if there are irregularities, they need to be investigated. I understand completely. After hanging up with Margaret, I made my second call. This one was to First National Bank, where I'd worked as a loan officer for 15 years before retiring. I still had friends there, people who owed me favors from the days when I'd helped them navigate difficult financial situations. Patricia, it's Gail Henderson, I said when my former colleague picked up. I need to ask you about a car loan that might have some irregularities. Patricia had always been thorough to a fault, the kind of person who double-checked everything twice. If anyone would take a questionable loan seriously, it would be her. What kind of irregularities? I have reason to believe that someone may have inflated their income on their application. Significantly. I knew this because I'd helped William with his taxes the previous year, and I knew exactly what he and Abigail made combined. When Abigail had bragged about getting approved for a $60,000 BMW, I'd done the math in my head. The numbers didn't add up, even with William's engineering salary. Do you have specifics? I gave Patricia all the information I had, Abigail's full name, the approximate date of the loan, even the dealership where she'd bought the car. Patricia took notes diligently, asking clarifying questions that told me she was taking this seriously. I'll look into it, she said finally. If there are discrepancies, the bank will need to take action. I appreciate it, Patricia. I really do. By Tuesday afternoon, Margaret called me back. You were right, she said, her voice tight with professional concern. We found over $12,000 in questionable charges over the past 8 months. Personal expenses, unauthorized purchases, even what appears to be a weekend getaway that she claimed was a client meeting. I closed my eyes, feeling a mixture of satisfaction and sadness. Satisfaction because I'd been right, sadness because this was my son's wife we were talking about. What happens now? She's being terminated immediately. We're also considering pressing charges, though that decision hasn't been made yet. I see. Gail, Margaret said, her voice softer now. I have to ask, why did you bring this to us? This is your family we're talking about. I stared out my kitchen window at the small garden I'd been tending for 20 years. The roses were blooming beautifully this year, despite the harsh winter we'd had. Sometimes family isn't what you think it is, I said finally. Wednesday morning brought a call from Patricia. The loan application was definitely fraudulent, she said without preamble. Income was inflated by nearly 40%, and some of the employment verification appears to have been forged. What does that mean for the loan? It means we're calling it in immediately. The car will need to be repossessed unless the borrower can pay the full amount within 72 hours. 72 hours. I knew Abigail didn't have $60,000 lying around. Nobody does at 32, especially not someone who just lost their job. I understand, I said. Thank you for looking into this. Gail, Patricia said. I hope you know what you're doing. I did know. For the first time in years, I knew exactly what I was doing. That evening, William called. I could hear the stress in his voice before he even spoke. Mom, something terrible has happened. Abigail lost her job today. They're saying she falsified expense reports, but that's impossible. She would never do something like that. I made sympathetic noises while my son explained how his wife had been escorted out of the building, how humiliated she felt, how unfair the whole situation was. And now the bank is saying there's a problem with her car loan, he continued. They want the full balance paid immediately, or they're going to repossess the BMW. I don't understand how this is all happening at once. That does seem like an awful lot of bad luck, I said carefully. We're wondering if someone is targeting her somehow. Like maybe a competitor or someone at work who was jealous of her success. The word success almost made me laugh out loud. Abigail's success had apparently been built on stealing from her employer and lying to banks. Have you considered that maybe the bank and her employer found real problems? I asked gently. Mom, you don't understand. Abigail is the most honest person I know. She would never do anything unethical. The most honest person he knew. This was the same woman who had called me a witch 3 days ago, who had spent years manipulating my son into believing his mother was a burden. I'm sure you'll figure it out, I said. Actually, Mom, I was wondering if you could help us. We need about $60,000 to keep the car. I know it's a lot, but... No. The word came out so quickly and firmly that it surprised even me. In the past, I would have found a way. I would have taken out a second mortgage, emptied my retirement account, done whatever it took to help my son. But that was the old Gail. The new Gail had learned that some lessons needed to be taught the hard way. What do you mean, no? I mean, I'm not giving you $60,000 to clean up Abigail's mess. Mom, this isn't a mess. This is consequences, William. Something your wife has apparently never had to face before. There was silence on the other end of the line. I could practically hear my son's confusion. I don't understand what's gotten into you, he said finally. What's gotten into me is self-respect, I replied. Something I should have found a long time ago. After hanging up, I sat in my living room and looked around at the home Abigail had called depressing. The furniture might be old, but it was comfortable. The wallpaper might be faded, but it held memories. This house had been my sanctuary for 30 years, and I was tired of apologizing for it. I was also tired of being the family's emergency fund. For years, I'd been the one everyone turned to when money got tight. William's student loans, his wedding expenses, the down payment on their first house. I'd helped with all of it, dipping into my savings again and again because that's what mothers do. But mothers also deserve respect. And respect was something I was going to start demanding. Tomorrow I had one more card to play. The biggest card of all. And unlike the others, this one was going to hurt. Thursday morning arrived gray and drizzling, which seemed fitting for what I was about to do. I'd been awake since 4 o'clock, sitting at my kitchen table with a manila envelope in front of me. Inside were documents I'd kept hidden for 33 years, papers I'd sworn I would never use as weapons. But desperate times change even the most sacred promises. The envelope contained DNA test results, medical records, and birth certificates. 3 different birth certificates to be exact. The truth about Abigail's parentage had been my burden to bear alone for over 3 decades. But after Sunday night's dinner, I realized that some truths were too powerful to keep buried. My phone rang at 8:30. It was William. His voice strained and exhausted. Mom, we need to talk. Can you come over? Actually, I think you both should come here, I said. There's something I need to show you. Can't this wait? We're dealing with a crisis right now. The bank repossessed Abigail's car this morning. No, William. This can't wait. Not anymore. There was something in my tone that must have gotten through to him, because he agreed to come over after lunch. I spent the morning cleaning my house one more time, not because it needed it, but because I needed something to do with my hands. By the time they arrived, every surface was spotless and the manila envelope was sitting in the center of my dining room table. Abigail looked terrible. Her usually perfect hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and she wasn't wearing any makeup. The designer clothes had been replaced with jeans and a wrinkled t-shirt. She looked like someone whose carefully constructed world had just collapsed around her. Good. What's this about, Mom? William asked, eyeing the envelope nervously. Sit down, both of you. They sat across from me at the same table where, just 4 days ago, Abigail had called me a witch. The irony wasn't lost on me that this was where everything would end. Before I show you what's in this envelope, I said carefully, I want you both to understand that what I'm about to tell you will change everything. Once you know this truth, there's no going back. Abigail rolled her eyes. Gail, we don't have time for your dramatics. William and I are dealing with real problems right now. Yes, you are, I agreed. But you're about to discover that your problems are much bigger than you thought. I opened the envelope and pulled out the first document. A birth certificate dated March 15, 1991. Abigail's birthday. This is your original birth certificate, I said, sliding it across the table to her. The one from the hospital where you were actually born. Abigail glanced at it dismissively. So what? I've seen my birth certificate before. No, I said quietly. You've seen the amended one. The one that was filed 6 months later. William leaned over to look at the document, and I watched his face change as he read it. His skin went pale, then gray, then almost green. Mom, he said, his voice barely a whisper. What is this? Read the father's name, William. Abigail snatched the paper from him, her eyes scanning the official text. When she found the line for father's name, her entire body went rigid. "This says Marcus Chun," she said, her voice flat and disbelieving. "Who the hell is Marcus Chun?" I pulled out the second document. A photograph of a young Asian man in military uniform. "Marcus Chun was your biological father. He was stationed at Fort Bragg when your mother was working as a nurse there." The silence that followed was deafening. Abigail stared at the photograph like it might bite her, while William looked like he was going to be sick. "This is impossible," Abigail said finally. "William is my father. You're lying." I pulled out the third document, DNA test results dated just 6 months after Abigail's birth. "I had these tests done when you were a baby," I said. "I suspected something was wrong because you looked nothing like William, and your mother had been acting strangely during her pregnancy." William's hands were shaking as he reached for the test results. I watched 33 years of assumed paternity crumble in front of his eyes as he read the scientific proof that Abigail was not his biological daughter. "The probability of paternity is 0.01%, he read aloud, his voice hollow. "Meaning there's a 99.99% chance that William Morrison is not the biological father. You've known this for 33 years? Abigail's voice was rising, taking on a hysterical edge. "You've known this whole time and you never said anything?" "I kept quiet to protect William," I said firmly. "He loved you from the moment you were born. He didn't care that Rebecca had cheated on him. He wanted to be your father, and I thought that was beautiful." "Rebecca cheated?" William looked like he'd been slapped. "My wife cheated on me?" "Your late wife had an affair with Marcus Chun that lasted 3 months, I said gently. "She confessed everything to me right before she died. She begged me never to tell you because she was afraid you'd stop loving Abigail." Abigail stood up so quickly that her chair toppled over. "This is insane. You're making this up. You're trying to destroy my marriage because you're jealous that I prefer Judith to you." "Sit down, Abigail." Something in my tone made her obey. She righted her chair and sat back down, but her whole body was trembling with rage and shock. "There's more," I said, pulling out another document. "After Rebecca died, I hired a private investigator to find Marcus Chun. I wanted to know if you had any other family out there." I slid a current photograph across the table, Marcus Chun at 55, standing in front of a successful-looking restaurant with his wife and 3 children. "Your biological father owns 4 restaurants in California. He has a wife and 3 other children, your half-siblings. He never knew you existed because Rebecca never told him she was pregnant." Abigail stared at the photo with a mixture of fascination and horror. "He has other kids? 2 daughters and a son. All successful, all happily married. Your oldest half-sister is a doctor, just like Rebecca was." William was still staring at the DNA results like they might change if he looked at them long enough. "Why are you telling us this now?" he asked. "After all these years, why now?" I met his eyes steadily. "Because Sunday night, your wife called me a witch and said she'd rather live with your mother than spend another minute in my house. She told me I was bitter and manipulative, that nobody enjoyed my company, and that you dreaded our dinners together." "Mom, she was upset." "No, William. She was honest. For the first time in 23 years, she was completely honest about how she feels about me." I gathered up the documents and put them back in the envelope. "So I decided to be honest too. About everything." Abigail was crying now, ugly sobs that shook her whole body. "You did this on purpose. You destroyed my job and took my car. And now you're trying to destroy my family." "I didn't destroy anything," I said calmly. "I simply stopped protecting lies. Your job was destroyed by your own theft. Your car was repossessed because of your own fraud. And your family was built on a foundation of deception that I've been maintaining for over 30 years. But William raised me," she said desperately. "He's been my father my whole life." "Yes, he has. And that's the only reason I kept this secret for so long." I looked at my son, this man who had chosen his wife over his mother so many times I'd lost count. But after Sunday, I realized that some secrets aren't worth keeping anymore. William stood up abruptly. "I need some air." "William, don't leave me here with her," Abigail pleaded, but he was already walking toward the door. "I need to think," he said without looking back. I can't process this right now." After he left, Abigail and I sat in silence for several minutes. She had stopped crying, but her face was blotchy and swollen. "What do you want from me?" she asked finally. "I don't want anything from you," I said honestly. "I just wanted you to know the truth." "The truth about what?" "That I'm not really a Morrison. That my whole identity is a lie. The truth about who has the real power in this family," I said quietly. "For 33 years I've kept your secret. I've protected your relationship with William, maintained the fiction of your legitimacy, and helped raise you as my own granddaughter." I leaned forward, looking directly into her eyes. "But after Sunday night, I realized something important. You've been treating me like I'm nothing, like I'm disposable, like I don't matter. But I'm the only person on earth who knows the truth about who you really are." Abigail's face had gone completely white. "Are you threatening me?" "I'm educating you," I said. "You called me a bitter, manipulative witch. You said I use guilt and pity to control people. But you know what real control looks like." I tapped the envelope with my finger. "Real control is having the power to destroy someone's entire identity with a single conversation. Real control is being the keeper of secrets that could tear a family apart. You wouldn't tell anyone else, wouldn't I?" I smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "What exactly is stopping me? You've made it very clear that I'm not really part of this family anyway." Abigail was quiet for a long time, staring at the envelope like it contained a bomb that might go off at any moment. "What happens now?" she asked finally. "Now you learn what it feels like when the people you depend on decide they're done with you," I said. "Just like you decided you were done with me." I stood up and walked her to the door. "Give my regards to Judith. I'm sure she'll be very interested to learn that her precious daughter-in-law isn't actually a Morrison at all." As I watched Abigail walk to William's car, her shoulders shaking with each step, I felt something I hadn't expected. Peace. For the first time in years, I felt completely, utterly at peace. 3 days passed in complete silence. No calls from William, no angry visits from Abigail, nothing. I was beginning to think that maybe they were actually processing what I told them in a mature way. I should have known better. The knock on my door came at 7:30 Friday morning, loud and authoritative. I opened it to find a man in an expensive suit holding an official-looking envelope. "Gail Henderson?" "Yes. You're being served with a restraining order and a cease and desist letter. Have a good day." He thrust the papers into my hands and walked away before I could ask any questions. I stood in my doorway in my bathrobe, holding legal documents that would change everything. The restraining order was filed by Abigail Morrison, alleging harassment, emotional abuse, and threats of further harm. According to the legal language, I was prohibited from contacting her directly, coming within 500 feet of her residence, or communicating with her through third parties. The cease and desist letter was more detailed and infinitely more insulting. It accused me of malicious interference with family relationships, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and defamation of character. It demanded that I immediately stop spreading false and defamatory information about Abigail's parentage and threatened a full civil lawsuit if I didn't comply. Both documents were signed by the same attorney, Jonathan Whitaker, Esquire of Whitaker, Pierce and Associates. I recognized that name immediately. Jonathan Whitaker was Judith's nephew, a successful lawyer who specialized in family disputes and had a reputation for being absolutely ruthless. Of course, Judith would call in family reinforcements. I was still reading through the legal papers when my phone rang. William's name appeared on the screen, and for a moment I felt a surge of hope that my son was calling to apologize, to tell me he was sorry for letting his wife attack me with lawyers. "Mom, what the hell did you do?" "So much for hope." "I told the truth," I said calmly. "Something this family apparently finds very threatening. You destroyed our lives. Abigail hasn't stopped crying for 3 days. She's having panic attacks. She doesn't know who she is anymore." "And whose fault is that, William? Mine for finally telling the truth, or yours for building your marriage on a lie?" "It wasn't a lie. She's my daughter in every way that matters." "Then why are you calling to yell at me instead of supporting her through this difficult time?" There was a pause. I could hear voices in the background, female voices that sounded agitated and upset. "Are you at Judith's house?" I asked. "We're staying here temporarily. Abigail doesn't feel safe going home after what you did. What I did. William, I showed you documents. I told you the truth about your wife's parentage. How exactly does that make her unsafe? Because you threatened her. She told me everything. You said you could destroy her identity with a single conversation. You're using this information as blackmail. I felt anger rising in my chest. Blackmail? I'm not asking for anything from her. I just wanted her to understand that actions have consequences. Well, congratulations. She understands. We all understand. You win, Mom. You've successfully destroyed our family. I didn't destroy anything that wasn't already broken. We're filing a lawsuit against you for emotional damages. Jonathan says we have a strong case. Jonathan Whitaker? Judith's nephew? Of course you're using family connections to try to intimidate me. This isn't intimidation. This is justice. What you did was cruel and calculated, and we're not going to let you get away with it. I sat down heavily in my kitchen chair. William, do you remember when you were 8 years old and you broke Mrs. Patterson's window with your baseball? What does that have to do with anything? Do you remember what I told you when you wanted to run away instead of facing her? Silence. I told you that running away from consequences doesn't make them disappear. I told you that the only way to move forward was to take responsibility for your actions and try to make things right. This is different. No, it's not. Abigail spent years treating me like garbage, calling me names, telling my son that his mother was a burden. She never faced any consequences for that behavior because you let her get away with it. Well, now she's facing consequences, and instead of taking responsibility, she's running to lawyers and restraining orders. You can't compare a broken window to this. You're right. A broken window is honest damage. What Abigail did to our family was deliberately cruel. And what you did was even worse. What I did. You stood by and let her do it. You sat in silence while she called me a witch. You never once defended me or told her she was wrong. You chose her over your mother every single time. And now you're surprised that I'm not willing to protect her anymore. I could hear more voices in the background, and then William's voice became muffled as if he'd covered the phone. I have to go, he said when he came back on the line. But this isn't over, Mom. We're going to fight this. Good, I said. Fight it. But while you're fighting me in court, ask yourself this question. In 33 years, when have I ever lied to you? When have I ever given you false information, or tried to hurt you deliberately? This is different. No, William. This is exactly the same. I told you the truth just like I always have. The only difference is that this time, the truth doesn't protect the people you want it to protect. After he hung up, I sat in my kitchen for a long time, reading through the legal documents again. They were clearly designed to intimidate me, to make me feel like I was some kind of criminal for telling my own family the truth. But as I read through Jonathan Whitaker's flowery legal language, I realized something important. They were scared. Really truly scared. If the information I'd shared was really false and defamatory as they claimed, they would have simply provided counter-evidence. The fact that they were trying to silence me with legal threats told me everything I needed to know about the strength of their position. I picked up my phone and called the one person I knew who could match Jonathan Whitaker's legal credentials. My own nephew, David Henderson, who practiced family law in the state capitol. Aunt Gail. David sounded surprised to hear from me. How are you? I'm being sued by my daughter-in-law and threatened with restraining orders. How are you? There was a pause. Are you serious? Completely serious. I need a lawyer, David. A good one. What happened? I gave him the abbreviated version. Abigail's behavior at dinner, my retaliation through her job and car loan, and finally the revelation about her parentage. David listened without interrupting, occasionally making small sounds of surprise or concern. Do you have documentation for all of this? He asked when I finished. DNA tests, birth certificates, medical records. Everything. And you've kept this information secret for 33 years? Yes. But you decided to reveal it now because of the way she treated you? I decided to reveal it because I was tired of protecting someone who saw me as disposable. David was quiet for a moment. Aunt Gail, I have to ask this as your attorney. Did you threaten her in any way? Did you say you would reveal this information unless she changed her behavior? No. I told her the truth, and then I explained that she'd been treating the wrong person like they didn't matter. But I never made any demands or threats. Good. That's important. I could hear him typing on his computer. Okay, here's what we're going to do. First, I'm going to file a response to their restraining order request. Based on what you've told me, there's no evidence of actual harassment or threats, just hurt feelings. What about the lawsuit? Let them file it. Truth is an absolute defense against defamation claims. If everything you told them is documented and accurate, they don't have a case. Even if it damages their relationship. Aunt Gail, the truth doesn't become illegal just because it's inconvenient. You have every right to share factual information about your own family, especially when that information has been used to manipulate and control you for decades. I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. So you'll represent me? I'll represent you and I'll do it for free. Family takes care of family. Family takes care of family. If only William understood that concept as well as his cousin did. The next morning David called with news. I filed our response to the restraining order, and I also sent a very pointed letter to Jonathan Whitaker, he said. I explained that his client's claims have no legal merit, and that any lawsuit would likely result in counterclaims for abuse of process. How did he respond? He called me within an hour. Apparently, he wasn't expecting you to lawyer up so quickly. And he wanted to know if you were planning to publicize this information about Abigail's parentage. I thought about that for a moment. What did you tell him? I told him that my client has no current plans to share this information beyond the family members who have already been informed, but that any further legal harassment might change that position. Meaning that if they keep trying to silence you with frivolous lawsuits, you might decide that the broader community should know exactly what kind of person Abigail really is. I smiled for the first time in days. I like the way you think, David. I learned from the best. You always taught us kids that bullies only understand one language. That afternoon, I got a call from someone I hadn't expected to hear from. Judith Morrison herself. Gail, we need to talk. Hello, Judith. I'm surprised to hear from you. I think you know why I'm calling. I assume it has something to do with your precious daughter-in-law's recent discoveries about her parentage. There was a sharp intake of breath. That's exactly what I'm calling about. What you've done is unconscionable. What I've done is tell the truth. Something your family seems to have a problem with. You've destroyed that poor girl's sense of identity for what? Revenge? Because she hurt your feelings at a dinner party. She didn't hurt my feelings, Judith. She revealed her true character. There's a difference. She's been like a daughter to me for over 20 years. I've watched her grow up, seen her struggle with feeling like she didn't quite fit in with William's family. Now I understand why. Yes, now you understand that she was never actually part of William's family to begin with. Blood doesn't make family, Gail. Love does. You're absolutely right. And since Abigail made it very clear that she doesn't love me, I see no reason to continue protecting her from the truth. There was a long pause. What will it take for you to keep this information private? Excuse me. What do you want? Money? An apology? For William and Abigail to start visiting you more often? Name your price. I started laughing. I couldn't help it. Judith, you think this is about negotiation? You think I revealed this information so I could extort something from your family? Isn't it? No. I revealed it because I was tired of being treated like garbage by someone who owes her entire life to my silence. But the fact that you think this is transactional tells me everything I need to know about your family's values. We're prepared to be very generous. Keep your money, Judith. I don't want anything from any of you except to be left alone. And the information? The information is true, it's documented, and it's not going anywhere. What William and Abigail choose to do with it is up to them. You're making a mistake, Gail. We have resources. We have connections. We can make your life very difficult. You mean more difficult than watching my son choose his wife over his mother for 23 years? More difficult than being called a witch at my own Mother's Day dinner? I don't think so. I hung up on her, feeling more powerful than I had in decades. Let them try to silence me. Let them file their lawsuits and make their threats. The truth was out, and there was nothing they could do to put it back in the box. The call came at 6 in the morning on a Tuesday, exactly 2 weeks after I'd revealed the truth about Abigail's parentage. I recognized William's number, but when I answered, it wasn't my son's voice on the other end of the line. "Gail, this is Judith. We need to meet. Today." "I don't think we have anything to discuss, Judith." "Oh, but we do. You see, I've been doing some research of my own since our last conversation, and I think you'll find what I've discovered very interesting." Something in her tone made my stomach clench. "What kind of research?" "The kind that involves private investigators and medical records and very interesting discoveries about your own past. Meet me at Rosewood Cafe at 10 o'clock, or I start making phone calls to people who might be very interested in what I've learned." She hung up before I could respond, leaving me standing in my kitchen with a growing sense of dread. Judith Morrison was many things. Manipulative, controlling, entitled, but she wasn't stupid. If she thought she had something on me, she probably did. I spent the next 3 hours trying to figure out what she could have possibly discovered. My life had been an open book for the most part. I'd worked the same job for 15 years, lived in the same house for 30, paid my taxes, followed the law. What secrets could I possibly have that would give Judith leverage over me? Rosewood Cafe was one of those upscale places where everything cost twice what it should, and the coffee came in cups the size of thimbles. Judith was already there when I arrived, sitting at a corner table with a manila folder in front of her. She looked immaculate as always, every gray hair perfectly styled, her makeup flawless despite the early hour. "Thank you for coming," she said as I sat down across from her. "I wasn't sure you would." "What do you want, Judith?" She opened the folder and pulled out a photograph. "Do you recognize this man?" I felt the blood drain from my face. The photograph showed a man in his 30s with dark hair and kind eyes. I hadn't seen that face in over 40 years, but I would have recognized it anywhere. "Where did you get this?" "So you do recognize him. Excellent." Judith pulled out another document. "This is a death certificate for Thomas Bradley, dated September 15, 1983. Cause of death: complications from pneumonia." But that's not the interesting part. My hands were shaking as I reached for my coffee cup. "Get to the point." "The interesting part is that according to several witnesses I've spoken with, Thomas Bradley was much more than just a friend to you back in 1983. In fact, he was the love of your life, wasn't he?" I said nothing, but Judith didn't need confirmation. She was clearly enjoying herself. "And according to medical records I've obtained, Thomas Bradley died just 3 months before you suddenly decided to marry Harold Morrison. Rather sudden timing, don't you think?" "What are you getting at?" Judith pulled out another document. A marriage certificate dated December 20th, 1983. "You married my son on the rebound, didn't you? You were so devastated by Thomas's death that you grabbed onto the first man who showed you any attention." "That's not true." "Isn't it? Because according to the people I've talked to, you and Thomas were practically engaged. You were planning a life together. And then he died, and 3 months later you were walking down the aisle with Harold." I stared at the photograph of Thomas, remembering his laugh, his gentle hands, the way he made me feel like I was the most important person in the world. Even if that were true, what does it matter? Harold and I had a good marriage. "Did you?" "Because from what I can see, you spent 35 years married to a man you didn't really love, raising a son who was a constant reminder that you'd settled for second best." The words hit me like a physical blow. "That's not true. I loved Harold. I love William. Maybe you learned to love them, but they were never your first choice, were they? Thomas Bradley was your first choice, and when he died, you grabbed onto Harold because you were afraid of being alone." Judith leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper. "And now you're trying to destroy William's marriage because you can't stand the thought that he found the kind of love with Abigail that you never had with Harold. You don't know what you're talking about." "Don't I? You've spent William's entire life being jealous of his happiness. First you were jealous of his relationship with his father, then you were jealous when he found love with Abigail. You couldn't stand that he had what you'd always wanted, a passionate, devoted partnership." I felt tears stinging my eyes, but I refused to let her see me cry. "Why are you doing this?" "Because I want you to understand something very important." Judith gathered up her documents and put them back in the folder. "You're not the only one in this family with secrets. You're not the only one who's capable of destroying someone's life with a few well-placed revelations. Are you threatening me? I'm educating you just like you educated Abigail. You see, I could very easily share this information with William. I could tell him that his entire childhood was built on a lie, that his mother married his father not out of love but out of desperation and fear. She paused, letting that sink in. I could tell him that every time you looked at him, you were thinking about the children you might have had with Thomas Bradley. I could destroy his faith in your love, just like you destroyed Abigail's faith in her identity. But you won't. No, I won't. And do you know why? I shook my head, not trusting my voice. Because unlike you, I understand that some truths are too cruel to share. Unlike you, I know that love is more important than revenge. She stood up, smoothing down her skirt. William and Abigail are dropping the lawsuit and the restraining order. They're also moving to California. California. Abigail has been in contact with her biological father. Marcus Chun has invited them to come out for an extended visit, to meet her half-siblings and explore that side of her heritage. They've decided to make a fresh start somewhere far away from all this family drama. I felt like the ground was falling out from under me. They're leaving. They're leaving, and they don't want any contact with you. Not now, maybe not ever. You can't make that decision for William. He's my son. He's a grown man who's tired of being caught between his wife and his mother. You forced him to choose, Gail. And he chose her. Judith picked up her purse and prepared to leave. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to let them go. You're not going to try to contact them. You're not going to show up at their new address. And you're definitely not going to share any more family secrets with anyone. And if I don't? If you don't, I'll make sure William knows exactly what kind of woman his mother really is. I'll tell him about Thomas Bradley, about your marriage of convenience, about the fact that his entire life was built on your inability to deal with grief. She leaned down close to my ear. And unlike Abigail's situation, William actually loves you. It would destroy him to learn that you never really loved his father. It would break his heart to know that he was just a consolation prize in your life. I sat there for a long time after she left, staring at my untouched coffee and thinking about Thomas Bradley. She wasn't wrong. I had loved him desperately, completely. The way you can only love someone when you're young and everything feels possible. When he died, I thought my life was over. Harold had been a friend, someone who was kind to me during my grief, and when he proposed 6 months later, I said yes because I couldn't imagine ever loving anyone the way I'd loved Thomas. But that didn't mean I didn't love Harold. It didn't mean I didn't love William. Did it? I drove home in a daze, Judith's words echoing in my head. Was she right? Had I spent 35 years being jealous of other people's happiness because I'd never gotten over my first love? When I got home, there was a moving truck in front of William and Abigail's house across town. I drove by slowly, watching strangers carry boxes and furniture out of the home where my son had lived for 8 years. William was standing in the driveway directing the movers. When he saw my car, he stopped what he was doing and stared at me. For a moment, I thought about pulling over, thought about trying one more time to explain myself, to make him understand that everything I'd done had come from a place of hurt, not malice. But then Abigail appeared beside him, and the look on her face was so cold, so full of hatred, that I knew it was too late. There was no going back from what I'd done, no way to repair the damage I'd caused. I drove away without stopping. That evening my phone rang one last time. It was William. "We're leaving tomorrow," he said without preamble. I wanted to say goodbye. "William, please. Can't we talk about this? Can't we find a way to work through it?" "There's nothing to work through, Mom. What you did was unforgivable. I told you the truth. You used the truth as a weapon. There's a difference." I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of everything I'd lost settling on my shoulders. I just wanted her to respect me. No, you wanted to hurt her. And you succeeded. She hurt me first. She said things in anger that she probably regrets. You destroyed her entire sense of self. Those aren't equivalent, Mom. So that's it? You're just going to disappear from my life. I'm going to build a new life with my wife far away from all this toxicity. Maybe someday when enough time has passed we can try to rebuild our relationship. But not now. Not for a long time. William, I love you. You're my son, and I love you more than anything in this world. There was a long pause. I know you do, Mom, but love isn't enough anymore. Some things can't be forgiven, even by people who love each other. The line went dead, and I knew I was truly alone. I sat in my living room that night, surrounded by the silence of a house that had once been filled with the promise of family dinners and grandchildren's laughter. The silence was complete now, absolute in a way that felt permanent. I had won. I had proven that I wasn't someone who could be dismissed or disrespected. I had shown them all that I had power, that I mattered. But as I sat there in the dark, I realized that winning had cost me everything I'd ever really wanted. 6 months later, I stood in my kitchen making coffee for one, just as I had every morning since William and Abigail moved to California. The silence that had once felt crushing had gradually transformed into something else entirely: peace. It hadn't happened overnight. Those first few weeks after they left were brutal. I'd find myself setting 2 places at the table out of habit, or picking up the phone to call William before remembering that he didn't want to hear from me. The house felt too big and too empty, filled with the ghosts of a family that no longer existed. But slowly, something unexpected began to happen. Without the constant stress of walking on eggshells around Abigail, without the endless cycle of trying to win my son's attention and approval, I started to remember who I was before I became defined by my role as the disappointing mother and mother-in-law. I started reading again, something I hadn't done in years because there had always been some family crisis demanding my attention. I joined a book club at the library, where nobody knew about my family drama and nobody cared that I was alone. I was just Gail, a woman who had thoughtful opinions about literature and made excellent coffee cake for the monthly meetings. I also started volunteering at the animal shelter, something I'd always wanted to do but never had time for. The animals didn't judge me for my past mistakes or care about my family situation. They just appreciated gentle hands and a patient voice, both of which I had in abundance. Most surprisingly, I started dating. Richard was a widower I met at the book club, a retired teacher who had the kindest eyes I'd ever seen. He listened when I talked, laughed at my jokes, and never once made me feel like I needed to apologize for taking up space in the world. "You seem different," he told me over dinner one night. "More peaceful than when we first met." "I am different," I said, surprising myself with how true that felt. I spent so many years trying to be the perfect mother and grandmother that I forgot how to just be myself. "Do you miss them? Your family?" I thought about that question for a long time. I missed the idea of them. I missed the family I thought we could be. But I don't miss the constant rejection and criticism. I don't miss feeling like I was always one mistake away from being completely cut off. That must have been exhausting. It was. I didn't realize how exhausting until it stopped. The truth was, I had spent decades pouring myself into people who saw me as an obligation at best and a burden at worst. Abigail had never hidden her disdain for me, and William had chosen her over me so many times that I'd lost count. I'd been so desperate to maintain some connection with them that I'd accepted crumbs and called them a feast. The revelation about Abigail's parentage had been my nuclear option, the one thing I could do to prove that I mattered. But in the months since they'd left, I'd come to understand that I didn't need to prove anything to anyone. I mattered because I was a human being worthy of respect and kindness, not because I held damaging secrets. That understanding came gradually, through therapy sessions with Dr. Martinez, a compassionate woman who helped me see patterns I'd been blind to for years. "You sacrificed your own emotional needs to maintain relationships with people who didn't value you," she explained during one of our sessions. "That's not love. That's self-abandonment. But they're my family. Family is supposed to be a source of support and love, not a source of constant stress and rejection. What you described isn't a healthy family dynamic. It's an abusive one." The word abusive had shocked me at first. I'd always associated abuse with physical violence, not with the subtle emotional cruelty that had defined my relationship with Abigail and, increasingly, with William. "Emotional abuse is still abuse," Dr. Martinez had said gently. "Being called names, having your feelings dismissed, being made to feel like you don't matter. Those things cause real psychological damage." She was right. I'd been so conditioned to accept poor treatment that I'd lost sight of what healthy relationships actually looked like. With Richard, with my book club friends, with the volunteers at the animal shelter, I was experiencing genuine respect and affection for the first time in years. On a crisp October morning, exactly 8 months after William and Abigail moved away, I received an unexpected phone call. The number was unfamiliar, but something made me answer. Is this Gail Henderson? Yes. My name is Dr. Lisa Chen. I'm calling about your former daughter-in-law, Abigail Morrison. My heart started pounding. Is she all right? She's fine physically, but she's been struggling emotionally since learning about her parentage, and she's asked me to reach out to you. She wants to talk to me. She wants to understand. She's been in therapy, working through her identity issues and her relationship patterns. Part of that process involves acknowledging the harm she caused to others. I sat down heavily in my kitchen chair. What does that mean? It means she's ready to take responsibility for her behavior toward you. She's not asking for forgiveness. She understands that might not be possible, but she wants you to know that she recognizes how badly she treated you and that she's sorry. I was quiet for a long moment, processing this unexpected development. Why isn't she calling me herself? Because she's afraid you'll hang up on her. And because she wanted a neutral party to explain that this isn't about trying to reconcile or rebuild the relationship. It's about making amends. I see. Would you be willing to speak with her? It could be done over the phone, or through video chat, or even through letters if that would be more comfortable. I thought about the woman who had called me a witch, who had made my life miserable for over 20 years. I thought about the rage I'd felt, the satisfaction of watching her world crumble when I revealed her true parentage. But I also thought about the peace I'd found in the months since then, the freedom of no longer carrying anger and resentment around like a heavy stone in my chest. I'll talk to her, I said finally, but I want to be clear about something. I'm not interested in rebuilding our relationship or pretending that what happened didn't happen. I'm willing to listen to what she has to say, but that's all. I understand completely. She'll be grateful for even that much. The call came 2 days later. Abigail's voice sounded different, smaller, less confident than I remembered. Gail? Thank you for agreeing to talk to me. You're welcome. I don't know where to start. The beginning is usually good. There was a shaky laugh on the other end of the line. I was horrible to you. For years and years I was just awful. I treated you like you were less than human, and I convinced William that you were the problem in our family. Yes, you did. I told myself that you were just difficult, that you were trying to interfere in our marriage. But the truth is, I was threatened by you from the very beginning. Threatened by me? Why? Because William loved you. Really loved you. And I was afraid that if he had to choose between us, he might choose you. I was surprised by this admission. So you made sure he never had to make that choice by making me the villain. Exactly. I made you into this unreasonable, demanding person who was always causing problems. And every time you tried to defend yourself or set boundaries, I used that as proof that you were difficult. And William believed you. William wanted to believe me because it was easier than dealing with the conflict. If I was right and you were the problem, then all he had to do was manage you. If you were right and I was the problem, then he had to deal with the fact that he'd married someone who was cruel to his mother. We talked for over an hour. Abigail told me about her therapy, about the identity crisis she'd experienced after learning about her biological father, about the guilt she felt for the way she'd treated me. I know I can't undo the damage I caused, she said toward the end of our conversation. But I want you to know that I understand now that you were never the problem. I was. What about William? William is struggling. He loves us both. And he's having a hard time accepting that he chose sides when he should have insisted on respect for everyone involved. Do you think he'll ever want to talk to me? I don't know. Maybe someday. But Gail, I need you to know something important. You don't need his forgiveness to move on with your life. You don't need any of us to validate your worth. Those words stayed with me long after we hung up. She was right. I didn't need their validation anymore. I'd already learned to validate myself. A year after that conversation, I was working in my garden when Richard came outside with a strange expression on his face. There's someone here to see you, he said gently. Your son. I looked up to see William standing at my garden gate, looking older and more uncertain than I'd ever seen him. He was alone, and he was holding a small bouquet of flowers. Daisies, my favorites. Hi, Mom. Hello, William. We looked at each other across the distance that had grown between us. Two people who had hurt each other deeply, and we're trying to figure out if there was a path back to something resembling a relationship. Can we talk? I stood up, brushing dirt off my gardening gloves. We can talk. But I need you to understand something first. What's that? I'm not the same person I was when you left. I'm not going to apologize for telling the truth, and I'm not going to beg for your forgiveness. I've built a good life here, and I'm not willing to sacrifice my peace for anyone anymore. William nodded slowly. I'm not asking you to. I'm asking if we can start over. As adults who respect each other, instead of as a mother and son trapped in old patterns. I looked at this man who had been my whole world for so many years, and I felt something I hadn't expected, curiosity instead of desperation. I was curious to see if we could build something new together, but I wasn't desperate for it. I didn't need it to be happy. We can try, I said finally. But it has to be different this time. I know. As we walked toward the house together, I realized that this was what liberation actually looked like. Not the dramatic confrontation or the satisfaction of revenge, but the quiet confidence of knowing that you're valuable regardless of how others treat you. I had lost a family, but I had found myself. And that, I thought as I invited my son inside for coffee, was the best trade I'd ever made.